How many lies can a man tell before God stops listening? I used to think about that, usually around 3 a.m., staring up at the stained glass ceiling of the rectory bedroom. The moonlight filtering through St. Jude, patron saint of lost causes, always seemed to mock me. People call this place holy ground. I call it the perfect blind spot. For 35 years, I've been Father Michael O'Connell, a man defined by routine, incense, and comforting platitudes. But the hands that offer the Eucharist are the same hands that were trained meticulously to break a man's neck in 8 different ways. Viktor Kryev died in 1989, or so the official documents say. A tragic accident during a counterintelligence mission in Hamburg. A hero of the Soviet Union, discreetly buried. A lie, of course. A necessary, beautifully crafted exit strategy cooked up by my handlers. And me. When the wall fell, the old ghosts needed new identities, and what better anonymity than absolute piety in the heart of the American suburbs? Nobody looks twice at a middle-aged priest in Massachusetts. They see a fixture, a pillar, a friendly shoulder to cry on. They see a man too pure to harbor secrets deeper than where the altar wine is stored, and that, my friend, is the whole damn point. My days were a masterpiece of mundane monotony. 6 a.m., morning prayers. 7 a.m., a quick black coffee, no sugar, never sugar, and the daily news digest, focusing strictly on international intelligence leaks that might whisper about old projects. 8:30 a.m., Mass, confessionals 3 times a week, counseling the bereaved, marrying the hopeful, administering last rites to the departing. The entire shebang was a constant performance. I learned to love the smell of the old oak wood in the confessional, the way it muted the sound of my own anxious breathing. I learned how to genuinely sympathize, because grief, fear, and guilt are the only things that truly cross borders, whether you're a CIA asset or a grieving widow. I was good at it, maybe too good. I became the real deal, on the surface at least. This quiet, predictable life was my sanctuary. It was supposed to last until my real heart finally gave out, until I could finally let Father Michael fade away and take Viktor Kryev with him. I had achieved the impossible. Silence. That silence shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, May 14th. It was during my usual weekly audit of the parish library's ancient texts. A tedious, dusty chore, but one I insisted on doing myself. Father Michael is dedicated to historical preservation, you see. I was cataloging the volume marked The Sermons of St. Augustine, Volume Frey, a book that hadn't been opened since Eisenhower was in office. It was placed, conspicuously, on the second shelf, 3rd book from the left, the exact placement designated decades ago for a communication drop, should the absolute worst happen. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, the kind of visceral reaction you can't train out of yourself. My hands, steady enough to hold the delicate wafer of the host, were shaking slightly as I pulled it out. It wasn't the dust I was worried about. It was the weight. It was lighter than it should have been. I carried it back to the rectory study, a room sealed off from the rest of the world by thick velvet drapes and the heavy silence of old guilt. I placed the ancient volume on the desk, the leather cracked and brittle. Inside, tucked right into the spine where the pages met the binding, wasn't a faded bookmark or a forgotten prayer card. It was a single sheet of rice paper, no bigger than a matchbox, printed with a code I hadn't seen since the early 80s. The Blackbird cipher, used exclusively by a specialized sector of the 1st Chief Directorate. My sector. The sector that officially ceased to exist in the wake of the dissolution. My breath hitched. My pulse went from the slow rhythm of a contemplative priest to the frantic drumming of a man running for his life in a hostile country. This wasn't a nostalgic message from an old comrade. This was a signal flare from the abyss. Someone knew Kryev was alive, and they had found the back door. I unlocked the safe concealed behind the painting of the Madonna and Child, a safe that contained a Beretta M9, 3 separate passports, and a miniature code book I'd memorized 30 years prior, but kept purely for confirmation. It took me less than 5 minutes to run the cipher. The old adrenaline, the drug I thought I'd successfully quit, was pumping through my veins like ice water. The decoded message was brutal in its simplicity. The pact is compromised. Protocol 74. Target. Shepherd. Tomorrow night. Failure to comply means immediate exposure. The ghost returns to the grave. I leaned back in the worn leather chair, the silence in the study now screaming in my ears. The pact referred to the deep cover agreement, forged in the late 70s, between a handful of top Soviet and American intelligence officers, a non-aggression, mutual protection deal designed to prevent global escalation in minor conflicts. I was one of the architects. If that pact was exposed, every single player involved, alive or dead, would be scrutinized. And since I was officially dead, my resurfacing would be a global catastrophe, turning the quiet priest into the most wanted relic of the Cold War. But the code's final, chilling words defined the immediate threat. Target. Shepherd. Shepherd. That was the operational moniker for the current director of Central Intelligence, DCI, Alexander Vance, a name that carried the weight of the entire U.S. intelligence apparatus. Eliminating Vance wasn't just treason. It was suicide via maximum international incident. But the order was clear. Protocol 74, immediate and absolute neutralization. The threat was even clearer. Failure means immediate exposure. They weren't asking me to kill Vance. They were forcing me. They had leveraged my entire existence, my decades of painstaking effort to disappear. Whoever sent this message knew exactly who I was, and knew that exposure would mean not just prison, but the agonizing, slow death of being debriefed and dismantled by both sides. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the heavy drapes back just enough to see the peaceful suburban street. Kids were playing catch across the lawn. A woman was watering her hydrangeas. Normalcy. A perfect mask. I was being pulled back into the game, dragged out of my coffin of quiet comfort. I was a man who lived by meticulously calculating risk, and right now the greatest risk wasn't executing the DCI. The greatest risk was doing nothing and allowing Viktor Kryev to be resurrected in the full glare of the media. I had to become the ghost again. But how the hell does a seemingly harmless man of God, whose calendar is booked solid with baptisms and community service, get close enough to eliminate the director of the CIA, the most protected man outside the White House, in less than 24 hours? I ran through the immediate logistics in my head. Vance was notorious for his faith, a devout Catholic who reportedly attended a private, non-denominational mass every Wednesday evening at a highly secure, non-disclosed chapel facility within the D.C. Beltway. Wednesday, tomorrow night. I felt a faint, almost nostalgic smile touch my lips. Vance was guarded by the best technology and the sharpest minds the U.S. had to offer. But they only guarded the obvious approaches, the diplomatic routes, the public events, the front door. They didn't guard the spirit. They didn't guard the one place where absolute trust was mandated by faith, where access was granted purely by the cloth I wore. The church. Of course. I reached for the phone. I couldn't use the rectory landline, too easily monitored. I pulled out a burner phone, an old Nokia 3310 relic I hadn't charged in 3 years, battery carefully preserved, and began tapping out a series of pre-arranged numbers. These were dead numbers, but they linked to a specific, dormant satellite connection. I was calling my sole remaining contact, a man I hadn't spoken to since I faked my death, a fixer in Berlin who specialized in document forgery and logistical nightmares. Yeah, a gruff, heavily accented voice answered instantly. The connection was clear, unsettlingly so. "The weather is turning cold in Boston," I whispered, using our pre-arranged safety phrase. A long pause on the other end. Then a slow intake of breath. "I thought you died, Father. I had a brief holiday. I need an itinerary and a new identity package by 4 a.m., delivered to the usual drop box in Georgetown, fast. And I need a specific piece of equipment smuggled through customs by noon tomorrow. Can you handle the logistics?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Georgetown by 4 a.m.? That's aggressive, Victor. What's the equipment?" I looked down at the cassock, running my fingers over the rough wool. "A specialized religious relic. Something small, silent, and very effective. And I need a full background check on DCI Alexander Vance's religious routines, particularly tomorrow night. I need to know the name of the priest scheduled for his evening mass." The silence this time was heavier, filled with the sheer impossibility of the request. He understood the gravity immediately. This wasn't about running numbers or leaking documents. This was the big leagues, a Hail Mary play against the very foundation of Western intelligence. This is insanity, Victor. You realize this is a one-way ticket if you fail. I died 35 years ago, my friend. I'm living on borrowed time anyway. Just make sure the documents are flawless. I need to become that other priest. I need his life, his access, his routine. Nobody will suspect a substitution. After all, I lowered my voice, a true predatory edge creeping in. Who questions the man who speaks for God? The decision was made. The comfortable routine was history. I was no longer Father Michael O'Connell, spiritual advisor to suburban Massachusetts. I was Victor Kryev, KGB defector, cold-blooded ghost, now tasked with assassinating the most powerful intelligence figure in the world. And I had 18 hours until the clock ran out. I needed to move fast, without a single misstep. The long walk back to the confessional was over. The game was on. The sudden rush of adrenaline is a treacherous drug. For 35 years I suppressed it with routine, prayer, and the sheer terror of exposure. Now it was back, burning away the decades of quiet solitude. I felt like a coiled spring yanked loose, snapping back to my original lethal configuration. But I wasn't 25 anymore. My joints protested, and the relentless pounding in my temples was a constant, unwelcome reminder that Victor Kryev had aged, even if his training hadn't. My first task was erasing Father Michael, not physically, but digitally and logistically. I had exactly 3 hours before I needed to hightail it out of Massachusetts and start the drive south. My cover story for the sudden absence had to be flawless. An emergency request to assist a gravely ill fellow priest in a neighboring diocese, non-negotiable, requiring immediate travel. I wrote the note, making sure the handwriting was hurried and slightly sloppy, the look of a man deeply concerned for a friend, not a spy preparing a wet work mission. The hardest part was going through the small collection of personal effects I'd allowed myself to accumulate. A worn leather-bound Bible, a set of keys, a half-finished crossword puzzle. These were the only true vestiges of Father Michael. Kryev had no personal effects. Kryev had only tools. I stripped down the rectory study in methodical silence. Every surveillance countermeasure I installed over the decades, the RF sensors behind the bookshelves, the shielded modem, the hidden radio receiver, all powered down, removed, and packed into a small, lead-lined medical bag designed to look like a priest's emergency sick call kit. The Beretta M9, which had felt like a dead weight for so long, felt strangely comfortable in my hands again. A necessary evil. The ultimate irony wasn't lost on me. I was preparing to assassinate the head of the U.S. intelligence community using the identity of a man of God. It was profane, audacious, and frankly, a perfect KGB strategy. Use what they trust most against them. I drove a nondescript, rented sedan, paid for in cash from a reserve stash I kept buried under a specific rosebush in the parish garden. I avoided all major highways, sticking to the winding backwoods roads, minimizing interaction with license plate readers and state troopers. The whole drive was a blur of grinding anxiety and intense scenario planning. Every passing car felt like a potential tale. Every reflection in a window felt like a hidden camera. Paranoia is exhausting, but essential. I reached the Georgetown drop spot right on time at 3:55 a.m. It was an old, unused postal box bolted into the wall of a condemned theater, a ghost location for a ghost agent. My contact, bless his weary soul, had managed the impossible. Tucked inside the box was a heavy envelope containing the essential components: new driver's license, credit cards, social security number, and a flawless, temporary ID for Father Thomas Aquinas Sterling, the scheduled celebrant for DCI Vance's Wednesday evening Mass. I quickly scanned the brief dossier on Father Thomas. Mid-50s, average height, distinguished gray hair, a slightly bookish look, and a known routine. He was meticulous, boring, and crucially, scheduled to travel across the country for a rare lecture series starting that morning. Perfect timing, courtesy of my mysterious handler, and likely involving a massive bribe or, more probably, a threat to Father Thomas's family. The details were disturbing, but necessary. Kryev couldn't afford to care about the collateral damage of others' lives, only the preservation of his own. But then came the gut punch. The package contained a supplemental sheet of rice paper, another coded message, slightly damp, suggesting it had been rushed. I decoded it using the faint light of the dashboard. Sterling delay. He resists. Execution required prior to 14 hours. Make it clean. Photo attached. The weapon is disguised as a crucifix. Do not fail. I swallowed hard. They couldn't guarantee Thomas Sterling's timely departure. The man was putting up a fight. Now, I wasn't just impersonating the priest. I had to actively eliminate him first, before taking his place. This wasn't just logistical complexity. This was a moral freefall, even for a man like me. For decades, I had avoided murder. Now, I had to commit 2 in 24 hours to save myself. My instructions for finding Father Sterling led me to a small private retreat house outside of Alexandria, Virginia. A serene place, totally insulated, where a man of the cloth would feel safest. The irony was almost too much to bear. I found Father Thomas around 10:30 a.m. He was sitting in a garden gazebo reading scripture, utterly unaware. He was exactly as the photo described. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. This man was truly innocent. He wasn't a spy, wasn't involved in the pact, wasn't part of the game. He was just a pawn whose life was being sacrificed for my survival. I made the approach silently, quickly, using the decades-old technique of masking sound with ambient noise, the chirping of birds, the gentle wind rustling the leaves. I wore black gloves and an expressionless face. He looked up, startled, as I stepped into the gazebo. "Can I help you, brother?" he asked, a gentle smile fading from his face. I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice not to betray me. I was too close, too exposed. I used a nerve pinch, a technique perfected in the Spetsnaz training camps, to immobilize him instantly. His eyes widened, reflecting pure confusion and terror, but he couldn't utter a sound. It had to be quick, silent, untraceable. I used a small, retractable wire, not for cruelty, but for absolute certainty. It was over in seconds. I laid him gently back, placing his Bible over his chest, a final, horrifying prayer. This was the lowest I had sunk since before I became Father Michael. I felt the cold sweat of self-revulsion. I had traded one life for another, trading Thomas Sterling's chance at redemption for Viktor Kryev's continued existence. My only consolation was the discipline. I was a ghost again, moving without trace, operating on pure instinct. I swapped clothes rapidly. His vestments, slightly too tight across the shoulders, now draped over me. I took his pectoral cross, his glasses, even the specific scent of his soap. Every detail mattered. The next component was retrieving the weapon. It was left for me in a locker at Reagan National Airport, inside a security envelope marked Confessional Repairs. The weapon, the specialized religious relic, was a masterpiece of lethal artistry. It was a silver crucifix, roughly 6 inches long, the corpus of Christ, beautifully detailed. But the internal mechanism was pure engineering genius. The head of the cross concealed a slow-acting, concentrated neurotoxin, a highly modified variant of VX, undetectable in a rapid autopsy, delivered through a microscopic, spring-loaded needle activated by slight pressure on the base. The contact point was designed to look like wear and tear on the silver. The dose was calculated to mimic a severe cardiac event within 2 to 3 minutes of exposure. The delivery system was what my handler had called the kiss of Judas. I was to offer Vance a brief blessing, pressing the cross into his hand or shoulder, a gesture no one would question, especially from his own priest. By 5:30 p.m., I was entering the D.C. area under the identity of Father Thomas Sterling, heading towards the highly fortified hidden chapel known only as the Sanctuary, Vance's private place of worship. I'd studied the layout, the security protocols, and the placement of every camera via the intelligence provided. The security was unbelievable. Layered physical checks, biometric scans, and highly trained personnel who treated the chapel grounds like a fortress. My only advantage? My cassock. I presented my forged ID and clerical documents at the first checkpoint. The guards looked bored, respectful, and slightly annoyed at the inconvenience of having to check a priest. They were looking for bombs, guns, or strange packages. They weren't looking for a man who had faked his own death and was carrying a lethal syringe disguised as a symbol of peace. At the second checkpoint, A young, earnest security agent, probably ex-Marines, put a wand over me. It pinged slightly. My heart plummeted. This was it. Game over. Exposure. The agent squinted at the screen. "Sir, what's that metallic object in your kit?" I forced the calmest, most reassuring smile Father Michael had ever given a nervous congregant. "Ah, my son. That will be the monstrance. I carry a small private one for reflection before Mass." The monstrance was indeed a metallic object used to hold the host. It was also large, clumsy, and impossible to conceal the Beretta inside. I had placed the gun, carefully wrapped in lead foil, inside the monstrance case precisely because I knew the lead would confuse the wand and give me a plausible religious explanation for a metal anomaly. The guard waved me through with an embarrassed apology. "Sorry, Father, just procedure." I realized then, with terrifying clarity, that the greatest mistake the CIA ever made wasn't trusting their director's devotion. It was allowing themselves to be blinded by respect for the sacred. They didn't calculate the possibility that the sacred itself could be weaponized. I was now inside the perimeter, inside the compound. I had achieved access that a dozen high-level spies would have killed for. I had the time, the weapon, and the means. The private chapel was small, exquisitely designed, and empty save for me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of old stone and newly polished wood. I walked to the altar, setting down the ritual items. I unwrapped the crucifix, my lethal relic, and placed it prominently on the altar cloth. A silent prayer, but not for forgiveness. A silent prayer for precision. The minutes ticked by, each second louder than the last. I heard the muffled approach of the DCI's security detail. The director was here. A heavy wooden door opened and two imposing figures entered first, sweeping the room with quick, professional glances. Then came Alexander Vance. He looked tired, older than his photographs, carrying the visible weight of global responsibilities. He walked straight to the small pew set aside for him, folded his hands, and closed his eyes in genuine, deep contemplation. I stepped up to the altar, pulling the vestments straight. I, Viktor Krayev, the most wanted man the West didn't know existed, was about to address the director of the CIA. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal inferno. I went through the Mass, reciting the liturgy by rote, focusing only on the moment of delivery, the moment of the final blessing, the moment when I would need to approach him. My mind was screaming, what if this is a trap? What if they know? Then, during the reading of the Gospel, I saw it. One of the security agents, positioned near the back door, didn't move like the others. His eyes weren't on me or the DCI. They were subtly, meticulously, scanning the high windows and the outside perimeter. And then, he made a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture, a slight movement of his left index finger against his ear. That gesture, I recognized it. It wasn't standard CIA protocol. It was a variation of a signal used by my old directorate. My stomach dropped out. I wasn't just performing an assassination. I was walking into an operation orchestrated by my own people, and I was the expendable variable. The Protocol 74 order wasn't just about eliminating Vance. It was about exposing the pact using Krayev as the fall guy, neutralizing the DCI, and possibly eliminating me simultaneously. I froze. I thought I had calculated every risk. I hadn't calculated the treachery of my own shadow organization. The game wasn't just on. The rules had been changed without warning. I was trapped. If I failed, I was exposed. If I succeeded, I was likely dead before I reached the chapel door. I looked down at the lethal crucifix in my hand. I had to proceed. There was no going back. But I had to change the play entirely. I had to kill Vance, yes, but I also had to survive the cleanup crew waiting outside. I had to pull off the impossible. I felt the fear, sharp and cold, but right behind it, the decades of training kicked in, pushing the panic aside. The signal from the agent, a clear sign of active surveillance by my former handlers, meant that the escape route I'd meticulously planned was already compromised. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were waiting for me to succeed, and then they would ensure Viktor Krayev died in the line of duty, conveniently erasing the last loose end of the pact. My only chance was to turn their perfectly engineered trap into my escape hatch. I continued the mass, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, but my hands steady as I elevated the host. The DCI, Alexander Vance, remained completely focused, head bowed. He was an easy target, too trusting in the sanctity of this space, too trusting in the man standing before him. The critical moment arrived, the blessing before communion. I approached Vance, the lethal crucifix clutched in my left hand, the thumb positioned perfectly over the firing mechanism. I leaned in slightly, as Father Thomas would have done, whispering a benediction. "May God bless and keep you, Alexander," I murmured, my voice a soothing balm of fake piety. Vance looked up, his eyes meeting mine. They were tired, weary, but surprisingly direct. He reached out his hand, palm up, ready for the contact. I pressed the cross, not into his palm, but hard against the side of the wooden pew right next to his shoulder. Click. The microscopic needle fired, injecting the concentrated neurotoxin not into the director, but into the old, dry wood. The action was instantaneous, hidden under the pretense of leaning for a closer prayer. The DCI didn't notice a thing. The movement was too slight, too integrated into the gesture. My initial error was assuming the mission was only to kill Vance. My new realization was that the mission was about my survival. If Vance died now, the CIA security team would lock down the facility immediately, and I would be cornered by my own people, who were expecting a dead priest and a dead DCI. If Vance didn't die right now, the dynamics changed completely. I stepped back, allowing the DCI to receive communion from the wafer I offered. I continued the mass, the weight of the lie pressing down on me. I knew the VX derivative I'd used was volatile. It would vaporize rapidly, diffusing into the wood fibers, leaving no trace in the immediate environment. I had successfully sabotaged my own assassination, but I still had to sell the death. As the mass concluded, I turned and offered the final blessing. The security agents relaxed slightly, moving to escort Vance out. "Alexander, one moment," I said, projecting the authority of the cloth. Vance paused, looking back. "I feel a profound calling to give you one final personal prayer. Something specific to the burden you carry." He hesitated, then dismissed his escort with a wave. "Of course, Father." This was it, the high-wire act. I approached Vance again, and this time I spoke in a low, rapid whisper, my English crisp and professional, but laced with my old, unmistakable Russian accent, an accent he would certainly recognize from top-secret debriefs. "Director Vance, your life is in extreme danger. Not from me, from your own internal security." Vance's posture stiffened instantly. The weariness vanished, replaced by the alertness of a predator. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the unexpected accent, the sharp, non-clerical command. "Who the hell are you?" he hissed back, his voice barely audible. "I am Viktor Kryev, the man who supposedly died in Hamburg, 89. I was sent to eliminate you tonight under Protocol 74. Your life and my survival depend entirely on the next 10 minutes. Listen closely. There is a deep cover operative on your security team, placed by the Pact's enforcement sector." He made a signal. I described the specific hand movement. "He is waiting for confirmation of your death before initiating the cleanup. You have approximately 3 minutes before the toxin I was ordered to use will be confirmed as a failure." Vance was a career intelligence man. He processed information faster than the average person breathes. He didn't question if I was telling the truth. He analyzed the strategic value of my confession. Why would an assassin admit his failure and warn his target? "Why are you warning me, Kryev?" "Because your death would erase the Pact entirely, exposing 3 decades of sensitive U.S. operations and ensuring my capture and guaranteed execution. I need the Pact to survive. I need you to survive, at least for now, to ensure I can disappear permanently. We are both targets of the same organization. Tonight, we are partners in survival." I pulled a small, innocuous-looking metal pin from the inside seam of my vestment, a tiny, coded tracking device. I pressed it into his hand. "Take this. When the security lockdown happens, and it will happen when they realize I failed, you must claim I attacked you. You must claim I was wearing a wire and that I was the defector Kryev. Then, plant this pin on the security agent I identified. Frame him as my primary contact. It will buy you, and me, time Vance's mind was racing. He was weighing the impossibility of the situation against the undeniable fact that a legendary ghost of the KGB was standing right in front of him, having just confessed to attempting his murder, yet also offering him a lifeline. The danger was real. The specific signal I'd mentioned was too accurate to ignore. "If you planted the poison in the pew, why didn't you use a clean shot?" Vance demanded, whispering urgently. "Because a clean shot leaves no doubt. This leaves room for doubt, for confusion, for the chaos I need to escape. They are expecting a clean heart attack. They will be looking for me to fail the escape, not the hit. You need to create a massive distraction, Director." Before he could respond, I stepped back, raising my voice to the level of a frustrated parish priest. "Alexander, are you even listening to the counsel of God? I see darkness around you. You must confess your deep sins now before it is too late." This was the distraction. I was turning the scene into a highly emotional confrontation between a priest and a powerful parishioner. Vance, a man accustomed to crisis, played his part perfectly. He stood up, towering over me, his face contorted in an expression of offended authority. "You dare question my faith, Father? You are a dangerous man. Guards!" The door burst open. The security team flooded the chapel. The agent I'd identified, the plant, was the first one to react, rushing towards me, hand immediately going to his sidearm. That was the mistake I needed him to make. I didn't run. Running was expected. Instead, I rushed past Vance and dove straight at the altar, sweeping up the monstrance case. Everyone froze, thinking I was going for a weapon inside the box. I wasn't. I was using the commotion to execute the final phase. I grabbed a large, heavy brass candle holder, one of the old, thick ones, and threw it with all my strength at the stained glass window depicting St. Jude. The glass exploded outwards in a shower of colored shards and a deafening crash. The shockwave of noise and glass was immense. "He has a bomb!" Vance screamed, executing his role flawlessly, pointing directly at the agent I had accused. "He was working with the priest! He tried to attack me!" Total chaos erupted. The remaining security detail immediately tackled their own suspicious colleague, while others formed a protective barrier around the DCI. I didn't wait for them to look back at the supposed priest. I bolted, not through the front, but through the gaping, jagged hole I'd just created in the window. The shards sliced my shoulder and back, a searing pain, but the fear of capture was a stronger anesthetic. I landed hard on the soft mulch of the chapel garden, rolling instantly into the deep shadows provided by the surrounding cedar hedges. The perimeter alarms were screaming now. Sirens were beginning to wail in the distance. I ran low, relying on my decades of operational awareness, avoiding the established patrol routes, making for the outer fence. I could hear men shouting, the heavy tread of boots, and the frantic orders being barked into radios. I didn't look back. I had left Father Michael O'Connell and Father Thomas Sterling back in the wrecked chapel. I was Victor Kryev again, running for his life, having just played a double cross on both the CIA director and his own handlers. I made it over the fence using a specific, known weak spot I'd identified from the intelligence packet. Landing outside, I stripped off the bloodied vestments, revealing the neutral gray clothing underneath. I discarded the clothes, the crucifix, everything connecting me to the night's events, burying them deep in a storm drain. I hailed a taxi half a mile away, in a residential neighborhood, looking like a thoroughly exhausted businessman who'd had a terrible day. "The main bus terminal, please. And step on it. I need to catch a late connection north." As the taxi sped away, I checked the pin I had given Vance. The signal was already active. He had planted it on the rogue agent. The CIA was eating itself alive, investigating an internal conspiracy orchestrated by a ghost who shouldn't exist. I made it to the terminal, bought a ticket, and boarded the bus. I was sitting in the very back seat, watching the blurry lights of DC recede in the distance, before I finally allowed myself to breathe deeply. I had survived, but the cost was immense. I had killed an innocent man to steal his identity, and I had detonated the single most volatile intelligence crisis of the last century. The quiet anonymity was gone forever. I was on the run, a fugitive from every intelligence agency on the planet, including my own former masters. Did I feel guilt for Father Thomas Sterling? Yes. It gnawed at me, a constant, ugly truth. But the alternative was the end of Kryev, and that was a professional failure I was not willing to accept. I am now simply a phantom. I move constantly, sleeping only when necessary, changing my face, my language, my life weekly. I live by the old KGB adage, trust no one, fear everything. I am running from the Pact's enforcement sector, which now knows I betrayed them, and from the CIA, which believes I am a deadly, exposed assassin. The only difference now is that DCI Alexander Vance knows the real truth. I saved his life, and he saved mine, creating the most unlikely, dangerous non-aggression pact of all. But how long until the pressure of his office forces him to sell me out? How long until he realizes that the ghost he helped escape is still the most dangerous man on Earth? I look out the window now, watching the dark highway. I have no sanctuary left. I only have the road, the shadows, and the constant, deafening knowledge that every lie I told as Father Michael O'Connell was merely practice for the one massive truth I had to tell to save my life. I am Viktor Krayev, and the Cold War never ended. It just went underground, and I'm still fighting it, one step ahead of the grave.